What's up, folks, and welcome back to Dyce Reacts, where we are staying in Australia tonight. Oh yeah, we are going to be checking out 50 words Australians pronounce weird. I'm going to say weird. American versus Australian pronunciation. Vermasa checks one out. We ain't going to waste no more time. Just going to get right into it, folks. We're going to get right into it. Oh yeah.
Emu, 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 mew, moo, mew, moo, mew. Emu. What is good, y'all? Tristan here, and today I am back with a new video. We are talking about 50 words that Americans and Australians just pronounce differently. As you can tell by the intro, the first word that Americans and Australians just pronounce differently is emu. So Americans pronounce it emu, Australians pronounce it emu. I recently did a video where I said emu and y'all just about lost it in the comment section. Everyone going after me for saying emu wrong or saying it the American way. It was actually that video, me saying emu, that kind of helped inspire this video. I had a bunch of you reach out to me saying that I should do a video about words that are pronounced differently. The first one to reach out to me was a subscriber named Craig, so shout out to you, Craig. But Craig, when he reached out to me, he sent me about, I don't know, 5 to 10 words that we pronounce differently. One of them being his very own name. He said the way I say it, just have been saying it, Craig, is wrong, or not how they say it in Australia. In Australia they pronounce it Craig. They really emphasize that A, Craig. Whereas in America we just kind of pronounce that name as like as if it had an E, like C-R-E-G, Craig. Anyways, those are the first two, but we got 48 more awesome words. So here we go. Number 3 is puma, or as they would say it in Australia, puma. Like the cat or the apparel company, or there's a petrol station line kind of like 7-Elevens here in Australia called pumas, or what they say puma, like a little gun, like pew pew pew. I don't know, that's what I think of when I think of it, but yeah, pew pew puma. Number 4 is buoy, or as they say it in Australia, boy. Like the little thing that floats in the water, we pronounce that buoy. Here in Australia they pronounce it boy, like boy and girl, kind of, yeah, same thing, boy. Before I say more of these words, I just need to make a quick disclaimer and say that not all Americans say this like the American way, and not all Australians say these words the like Australian way. I ran this video, like this list by a couple Australians. There was like 4 or 5 Australians. Not all of them pronounced all the words the exact same. Like there are a couple words that like a couple of them said it the American way. There's actually like 1 or 2 words on this list that I say the Australian way, but in general I think most Australians say it the Australian way and most Americans will say it the American way in terms of this video. Okay. All right, there we go. That was the disclaimer. Number 5 is Nutella. This yummy stuff. Americans like me, I would pronounce this Nutella, like it's Nutella. Here in Australia, they pronounce it Nutella, like a nut. Yeah, Nutella. Number 6 is the popular card game Uno. In America, we pronounce it Uno. It's kind of like the emu one, Uno. Here, it is more pronounced like Uno. Number 7 is caramel, or as it said in Australia, caramel. 8 is tomato, or as it said in Australia, tomato. Number 9 is a crazy one. It is this stuff that you like put over food and whatnot. We would call it in America aluminum. Here in Australia it is aluminium. 10 is the apparel company. In America we would pronounce this as Adidas. However, here in Australia it is Adidas. One thing I want to note real quick is a lot of these differences in pronunciations are like they come from England, and so a lot of these words that Australians say differently to Americans, you could almost make this whole list and say English people also say these words different. Not for all of them, but as a general rule of thumb you could say it for most. Number 11 is this car company right here. So we would pronounce this in America as Nissan. However, here in Australia it is pronounced Nissan. Number 12 is this, I don't know, breathing, respiratory condition, whatever you want to call it. In America we call it asthma, and in Australia it's pronounced asthma. We kind of say it more like a Z sound, like asthma, where here it's more like an S sound, like asthma. 13 is this plant. We would call it oregano in the States. However, here in Australia it is pronounced oregano. This plant right here, I would pronounce
oregano. Yeah, I've heard the name oregano
in the States. However, here in Australia it is pronounced oregano. This plant right here, I would pronounce this, or Americans would pronounce this as basil. However, in Australia it is pronounced basil. This nut right here, me and most Americans would pronounce this as pecan. However, in Australia most people pronounce this as pecan. Now number 16 is kind of an iffy one because I actually naturally say this one the Australian way, but I've heard it both ways in America. So that is apricot or apricot. So apricot is like the American way, but I've always pronounced it apricot, which is how like everyone in Australia pronounces it. Number 7.
Coming to the realization, I see Australian I'm British and American because there's a mixture of the three. Because I'm realizing it's not even one of the two. It's like sometimes I'm hearing the British way of saying it. So hmm, this is very interesting.
19 is fillet, or it's fillet if you're American. Here in Australia, they pronounce it as fillet, so it is a fillet of fish or a fillet of fish. Fillet, fillet. Now the next two are just letters, but that is the letter Z, so I pronounce it Z as I just said, but in Australia they pronounce it Z. The next letter is this letter. H is that I would say it. However, and like some people in Australia do say H, but a lot of them here pronounce it H, like H. 20 is leisure, so me and like every American pronounces it leisure. I've never heard it pronounced any other way. However, I came here to Australia and they pronounce it leisure. The next two are countries, so Iraq, we pronounce it Iraq. Here they pronounce it Iraq. Like we say I, they say Iraq, Iraq. Same thing for the next one, which is Iran, Iran. Yeah.
I do say Iraq, not Iraq. Yes. The only time I really hear Iraq is when the news is giving it, usually American news or British news, but I usually say Iraq. Yeah, so definitely that's more on the Aussie side for sure.
Just a minor difference. 23 is fragile, or it's fragile if you're American. Here in Australia, how they say it is it's fragile, like they say aisle, we say oh. 24 is missile, or as they would say it in Australia, missile. And 25 is military, or as they would say it in Australia, military. America, military, Australia, military. Now 26 is gonna be the most controversial of them all, because not all Australians, I would actually say most Australians don't say this word this way, but I've heard of a couple say it, and I'm telling you, it is so wrong. It sounds, of all the ones, this is the most triggering for me. I hate it when people pronounce this word this way, and that is vitamins. Like, did you take your vitamins this morning?
That's how I pronounce it, vitamins. So I'm guessing Australia say vitamins.
You know, it's healthy to take your vitamins.
Sounds weird.
Some people in Australia, I don't know why, but they pronounce it vitamins. No, it can't be, it's not vitamins. That just sounds so wrong. All these words that I've said, not one way is right over the other. They're just different ways of pronouncing words. But this one, I'm gonna stick by it and say vitamins is right. Vitamins, it just sounds wrong. 27, in America we say garage. In Australia, some people still say garage, but a lot of people here also say garage. That one seems to be about like a 50-50 split here. It's kind of like, there's an American way to say it and the English way to say it, and in Australia they kind of, I don't know, have like, they kind of do both. 28 is this lovely striped animal right over here. I would pronounce this, Americans would pronounce this as zebra. However, in Australia, they pronounce it zebra. 29 is mobile, or as they would say it in Australia, mobile. 30 is a crazy one because when I first heard it, like, I thought it was a different word. I didn't realize that they were saying the same word, just pronouncing it different, but that's cordial or cordial. So yeah, in America, we pronounce it cordial, whereas here in Australia, it's pronounced cordial. 31 is advertisement, and the difference is like which syllable you stress. So in American English, we would say advertisement, and in Australian English, you say advertisement. It's like there's more emphasis on the verb.
Advertise, okay. So where I'm from, many people say advertisement. So I'm wondering if it's more on the British side. You guys hit me up in the comments, because I thought he was gonna say advertisement for the Australian. But he said neither, so I'm guessing this is more on the British side.
Part. When we shorten that word, we refer to it as an ad, like, oh, do you see the Super Bowl ad? Whereas in Australia, when they like shorten that word down, they shorten it down to advert. So like, oh, did you see that advert? 32 is depot, so yeah, Americans, we pronounce it depot. In Australia, they pronounce it depot. 33 is this fragile little thing that you put flowers in, so we would pronounce it in American English as vase, whereas here in Australia they pronounce it vase. So the way we say it, it rhymes with like face, like your face, vase, face, whereas here it is vase, as in like phase, like it doesn't phase me. Phase, vase, face, vase, phase, vase. Yeah, I think I'm saying that right. That's gonna be, yeah, you get it. Vase, screw it, you got it already. Moving on. 34 is adult, or as they would say in Australia, adult. 35 is mom, which they say in Australia as mum, but that's also English influence, but this is kind of more than just a different pronunciation because we spell it M-O-M, and here in Australia they spell it M-U-M, so it's like, I don't know if they pronounce it differently or if it's just a different word, but yeah. Mom. 36 is premiere or premiere. So in American English, we would say this word as premiere. Australian, premiere. I kind of like the way Australians say it more. I think that sounds more right. So yeah, premiere, premiere. 37 is herb, or oh god, herb. I just said it the Australian way. In American English, herb, you just don't pronounce the H at all. And in Australian English, it is herb, you do pronounce the H. 38 is scone, so this thing right here, we pronounce that in American English as scone, whereas in Australian English, it is pronounced scone. 39 is this car brand right here. So in America, we pronounce this Hyundai, which everyone tells me is wrong. It probably is. So we pronounce this as Hyundai. Here, they pronounce it as Hyundai. Americans make it like 2 syllables, like Hyundai. Australians 3 syllables, Hyundai. Now 40 and 41 are quite similar, but that is semi. So yeah, we say this word as semi, like with the I, we say I at the end. In Australian English, they would pronounce it semi. Semi, but yeah, I know some Americans who say it the
I use both, but it depends on what am I talking about. I have a habit of using one for, like, come to think about it, in hindsight, I don't usually say semi or semi throughout. It depends on what I'm referring to.
Australian way, the semi way. In similar fashion, we have anti and anti. Americans, hard I, long I, whatever you want to say. Anti, Australians, anti. And similar to anti, we have aunt or aunt. So, and like, it goes, Americans say it both ways, but I've always said it aunt, like your aunt and uncle. But there are some people in America who pronounce it aunt. Here in Australia, everyone pronounces it, or at least everyone I've met has pronounced it aunt, which honestly kind of makes sense because, like, I don't know, your aunt isn't like an aunt, like she's an aunt. 43 is entrepreneur, so I've always pronounced this entrepreneur. In Australia, they pronounce this entrepreneur, so like entrepreneur. 44 is niche or niche, so
it's not American, it's not even Australian, because entrepreneur, that's the way that I usually say it, entrepreneur. Usually that's how I've heard it in my country. So I would say maybe it's more on the British side. I don't know. You guys hit me up in the comments, because it was neither the way that I usually hear people say it in my country, or not the way I usually say it.
In America, again, Americans say this both ways. I've heard Americans say niche, I've heard Americans say niche, but it's pretty common to say niche. I myself have always said niche, but in Australia, no one says niche. It is niche here in Australia. 45 is this spice right here, so I would pronounce this as turmeric. However, in Australia, they would pronounce it as turmeric, like you have a tumor, turmeric. You get it? 46 is bouquet. So I say bouquet, but like a soft O, bouquet. Here in Australia, they would pronounce it bouquet. A bouquet of flowers, bouquet of flowers, bouquet, bouquet. 47, I don't know if it's necessarily a difference in pronunciation, but it's kind of like a word, but also pronunciation. So if you have an animal, like a dog, that is your pet. And your pet likes it when you pet them. Or that's what we would say in American English. You would say you pet your pet, you pet your dog. We use the word pet as a noun and a verb. Here in Australia, they don't do that. They would say you pat your dog. You pat your cat. I don't know if you really pat cats, but you get it. They would say you pat your pet. We would say we pet our pet. Now these last three all kind of have to do with how Australians pronounce the R sound at the end of a word. So they just don't really pronounce it. So for example, we would say car, where here in Australia it's just like car. Like they hardly say the R. And this goes for like a bunch of words. Like any word that ends in like an IR, ER, AR, in Australia, just kind of how the accent is, they just say So like doctor, doctor, butter, butta, better, betta. The R is not really pronounced. Well, these last two, it's kind of a question for you Australians. It's gonna be controversial, but I wanna ask. These two cities, so y'all have Melbourne and y'all have Cairns. Australians love to get Americans a hard time for mispronouncing these cities. We call Melbourne, Melbourne, and we call Cairns, Cairns, because there's like an R there. Well, my question for you is, are we actually mispronouncing these cities, or are we just saying them with an American accent? It's hard for me to say one way or the other, because like on one hand I'm like, all right, like whoever lives in that city gets to name the cities and like say how it's pronounced. So yes, it's Melbourne and it's Cairns. But then at the same time I'm like, if the actual name of the city, if the actual name is actually Melbourne and the actual name is actually Cairns, it wouldn't matter, because the Australian accent just leaves the R off if it's ever in the last syllable of a word. So you would pronounce Melbourne, Melbourne, and you would pronounce Cairns, Cairns.
He made me think of something that I never thought of until now. And I'm guessing I'm Aussie, British, and American. A mix. I gotta put up all 3 flags behind me next time I do a video. I may say a pronunciation depending on what I'm talking about, or maybe how I structure the sentence when I'm speaking, but I don't use it. Some words I don't pronounce it the same way all the time, and I'm just realizing that in terms of when I'm speaking. I'm not talking about in terms of what I write, in terms of what I speak. And I just realized what he said there, but I can't really tell you which is which, because I gotta check it out myself, see if I can catch that habit that I have. And like he said, it has a lot to do with the words that have the R, the E's, the I's. That's the trend that I'm seeing, especially when it comes to the pronunciation, especially with the Aussie aspect. If you want to see that long channel, actually, like, do hit me on Dyce Reacts, Buzzin Reactions. This is where I'm gonna be making my exit. Until next time, peace out.